The night the forest swallowed them. The storm came without warning. Wind howled through the pines, shaking the old ranger station's windows like fists. 11-year-old Lily held Owen's hand tight as they ran down the dirt trail, their lantern sputtering in the rain. "Almost there," Owen panted, pointing toward the ridge where their parents' cabin used to be, the only home they had before the fire took everything. They never made it. By morning, the twins were gone. Search teams scoured every inch of the forest, dogs, drones, hundreds of volunteers. Only their lantern was found, cracked and flickering near Hollow Creek. Sheriff Mason closed the case. 6 months later, "Animals," he said quietly. "The mountain doesn't forgive the lost." But their foster mother, Mrs. Keene, never believed it. "The mountain took them," she whispered every year on the anniversary. "But one day it'll bring them back." 10 years later, the ridge was silent. The old cabin stood in ruins, half swallowed by vines. The path had vanished beneath moss and roots. Ranger Caleb Morgan knew every tree in those woods, or so he thought. On a cold October night, while patrolling the edge of Hollow Creek, he saw it. A light, soft, golden, and steady, glowing from the cabin window that had been broken for a decade. He froze. No one's supposed to be up there. The forest was still. No footsteps, no wind, only that impossible light flickering through the trees like a heartbeat. Caleb's voice trembled as he radioed in. "Dispatch, I think someone's inside the Fletcher cabin." When backup arrived, the light was gone. But inside, the air was warm, as if someone had just been there. The floorboards creaked under Caleb's boots. Dust hung in the beam of his flashlight like falling snow. On the table sat 2 cups, one half full of water, still rippling. "Maybe squatters," Deputy Rowe muttered, though his voice was thin. "No footprints outside," Caleb replied. "No tire tracks. Nothing." Then he saw it. On the far wall, faint drawings scratched into the wood. A boy and girl holding hands beneath a pine tree. A wolf beside them. "Lily and Owen," Caleb whispered. The sheriff looked up sharply. "You knew them?" "My little sister went to school with them," Caleb said quietly. "They used to talk about a wolf that followed them home." He reached for the table and noticed something else, an old camera, dusty but intact. The kind kids used before phones took over. "Bag it," the sheriff ordered. "We'll check it back at the station." As they turned to leave, the wind pushed the door open. For a heartbeat, Caleb swore he heard a child's laugh, faint, carried by the pines. The next morning, Sheriff Mason sat in his office, staring at the recovered camera. The batteries had long died, but the memory cards still worked. One by one, the photos loaded on his computer. The first few showed the twins, smiling, muddy, alive, building something, a cabin frame maybe. Then the pictures darkened, blurry forest shots, a wolf in the distance, someone's shadow near the trees. The final photo froze Mason's breath. It was taken from inside the cabin, facing the window. Outside, the storm raged, but 2 figures stood there, holding hands, and behind them, faint but visible, was a third shadow, taller, human. Caleb stared at the screen. "That can't be real." Mason rubbed his temples. "Timestamp says last night." The room went silent. That night, Caleb returned to the ridge alone. He told himself it was to check for intruders, but deep down, he wanted to believe something, anything, beyond logic. The forest was colder than before. The moon hung low, caught in the branches like a pale eye. He reached the cabin just before midnight. Inside, the air felt alive again, warm, humming with quiet energy. On the table, something new waited. A folded piece of paper. He opened it slowly. The handwriting was shaky, childlike. "We're home now,"
Don't be afraid.
Caleb's hands trembled. He looked up, heart pounding. For a brief, impossible second, he saw them, two children by the window, smiling through the glass. Then they were gone. Only the faint scent of pine and smoke remained. By morning, the note was gone. Caleb searched the cabin floor, the window ledge, even the ashes in the hearth. Nothing. Only faint indentations in the dust, as if small feet had walked there hours before. He radioed Mason. "Sheriff, I found something strange." "Strange how?" "Like the twins came back," Caleb said, voice low. "There was a note. It vanished." Mason sighed. "Caleb, you've been awake all night. Lock up and come down. We'll talk." But when Caleb turned to leave, he noticed another detail he'd missed before. The half-built model of a cabin carved from pine bark tucked behind a beam. It was new, the shavings still fresh. He picked it up gently, ran his thumb along the roofline. Inside on the tiny door, two letters were carved. L and O. Maple Hollow had stopped speaking of the twins years ago. Their photos once hung in the diner beside faded flyers of missing pets, but were taken down after the third year. People needed to move on, or at least pretend. When Caleb entered the diner that morning, conversation dimmed. Mrs. Keynes sat at the counter, older now, hair silver, eyes sharp. "You saw something," she said before he could even sit. He hesitated. "Light in the cabin. And drawings. Maybe kids." Her hand trembled around her coffee cup. "I told them the mountain keeps what it loves. You should have left it alone." "What do you mean?" But she only smiled sadly. "If the twins found peace, don't drag them back into the noise of the living." Outside, a storm began to form over the ridge again. That evening, Mason called Caleb into the station. "I sent the camera card to the state lab," he said. "They pulled hidden files. You should see this." The monitor flickered, showing grainy video, children's laughter, shaky hands, a glimpse of trees. Lily's voice whispered, "Don't show them yet, Owen. They'll find it." Then, static. The second clip showed the same cabin, but the timbre of their voices had changed. Older, deeper, scared. A man's shadow crossed the frame. Owen's whisper, "He said he'd take us home." The video cut out. No timestamp. Caleb swallowed hard. Someone else was there. Mason nodded slowly. "We cross-checked the background. That ridge. No such trail exists anymore." A silence hung between them, heavy and uncertain. Something, or someone, had rewritten the forest itself. Unable to sleep, Caleb returned once more. He followed the sound of the creek, but halfway up the ridge he noticed something impossible. A narrow trail cutting east, bordered by stones stacked neatly on either side. He shone his flashlight ahead. Fresh prints, small ones, trailed up the path. Every instinct told him to turn back, but curiosity held him fast. The trail opened into a clearing he didn't recognize, a circle of untouched pines surrounded by mist. At its center stood another structure, smaller, newer, a replica of the twins' cabin. Inside, dustless furniture, two beds made neatly, a pair of worn shoes under each, and on the wall, a framed photograph of Caleb himself, age 12, smiling beside the twins at school. He staggered back, breath short. Who had been here, and how did they know him? The next morning, the clearing was gone. Caleb hiked to the same spot under full daylight. No stones, no path, only thick underbrush where the trail had been. He stood there for a long time, feeling the hush of the trees press close. Then he spoke quietly, to no one in particular. "If you're still out here, I saw it. I saw what you built." A gust of wind moved through the pines, soft and low, almost like a sigh. Later, back at the station, He placed the tiny pine bark model on Mason's desk. "We'll never prove what happened," he said.
But the forest remembers.
Mason studied the carving. "You think they're alive?" Caleb smiled faintly. "I think some stories just keep living, whether we find the ending or not." Outside, dusk settled over Maple Hollow. Up on the ridge, far beyond sight, a single window glowed faintly before fading back into the dark. Old letters, new voices. A week later, Caleb couldn't shake the feeling he'd forgotten something important. He kept thinking about the carved initials, L and O, and the strange replica cabin that vanished with daylight. Digging through old Ranger archives, he found a folder labeled Fletcher Case 2015. Inside were reports, sketches, and a note he'd never seen before. It was addressed to Caleb Morgan, dated a month after the twins disappeared. The handwriting was childish, uneven. "If we don't make it home, tell Mrs. Keene we found it. Tell her we're not scared." He froze. "How did they know me?" he whispered. The letter had been filed under miscellaneous evidence, unsigned, unread. He took it to Mason. The sheriff looked up, brow furrowing. "That wasn't in the case files I inherited." Caleb swallowed hard. "Then someone didn't want it found." Caleb couldn't sleep that night. Instead, he drove out to the overlook where the twins were last seen. Moonlight spilled across the trees, turning them silver. He remembered being 15, the day Mrs. Keene took the twins in. He'd helped her build their bunk beds, taught them to fish. Lily used to draw tiny cabins in her notebooks. Owen collected pine cones and called them wolf food. They had followed him once into the forest, searching for a hidden stream he mentioned. He'd gotten angry, told them to go home. It was the last day he saw them. Now, guilt sat heavy on his chest. He whispered into the wind, "I should have stayed." A sound came from below, the low growl of an engine or maybe thunder. He looked down the ridge and saw it again, a flicker of light where no road existed. At dawn, Caleb went to the river trail to check for campers. Instead, he found a woman sitting on a rock near the water, hair dark, coat worn thin. She looked up as he approached. "Morning," he said gently. "You were in the papers," she said. "You found the cabin light." Caleb blinked. "Do I know you?" She smiled faintly. "Maybe. You knew Lily and Owen, didn't you?" His chest tightened. "You're their mother?" The woman shook her head. "Their sister, half-sister. I came when the news broke. I thought I'd feel them here." She handed him a photograph, 3 children by a pond. The twins, younger, and a teenage girl between them. "I left before the fire," she said softly. "I never stopped looking." When he looked up again, she was already walking away, vanishing into the mist. Back at the ranger station, Caleb placed the photo on his desk beside the pine bark model. The resemblance was undeniable. He opened the old filing drawer again, checking the evidence log. Something had changed. The list now included an item he'd never seen. 1 silver bracelet, recovered from cabin, initials L.O. But when he checked the physical evidence box, it was empty. He called Mason. "Who logged that bracelet?" Mason's voice was tight. "No one from our side." Static hissed through the line, then cut. Caleb sat there, the hum of the forest outside louder than usual. He looked up at the window. The reflection staring back wasn't alone. For a heartbeat, 2 small shapes stood behind him, then faded when he turned. That evening, Caleb returned one last time. The air was sharp, smelling of pine and smoke. The cabin seemed smaller now, almost fragile. He set the letter, the photograph, and the pine model on the table. "If you built this place to be found," he said quietly, "I found it. I'll keep it safe." The light above the table flickered once, then steadied. Outside, snow began to fall, soft, almost peaceful. He whispered, "You can rest now." Somewhere beyond the trees, a wolf howled, low, mournful, yet oddly comforting. Caleb didn't move, he just listened, until the sound blended with the wind. When he left the cabin, he didn't look back, but halfway down the ridge, curiosity made him turn. Through the falling snow, the window glowed faintly, two silhouettes side by side. The mountain had kept its promise. Mason met Caleb the next morning at the ranger station, a file tucked under his arm. "State wants to close this up," Mason said flatly. "They're calling it vandalism. Kids breaking in, lighting candles." Caleb shook his head. "Kids don't leave 10-year-old evidence in perfect condition." Mason sighed. "You've been in that forest too long, Caleb." "Maybe," Caleb said quietly, "but I know what I saw." He placed the pine model on the table, pointing to a mark on its underside. It wasn't random carving, it was a symbol, a spiral with two dots in the center. Mason frowned. "That looks familiar." "Lily used to draw it on the classroom desks," Caleb said. "She said it meant home." Silence filled the room. Mason rubbed his temples. If they wanted someone to find it after all this time, maybe we're not looking at a disappearance. Maybe we're looking at a message. They hiked back to the ridge at dawn. The snow was heavier now, and mist hung over the valley like breath on glass. Halfway up, Mason stopped. "You hear that?" Caleb listened. Under the wind came a faint creak, like wood under weight. They followed the sound to an old bridge spanning a frozen stream. Beneath its planks lay a small metal box wedged between roots. Caleb pried it open with his knife. Inside was a roll of undeveloped film, wrapped in a note. "For whoever finds our story." Mason stared at it. "That's their handwriting." Back at the ranger station, they took the film to the town's last photo shop. The owner, an old man named Griggs, recognized the twins immediately. "They came in once," he murmured, "wanted to learn how to use a camera, said they were making a time capsule. When the photos finally developed, everyone fell silent. The last image showed Lily and Owen, older than in any public record, maybe 13 or 14, standing outside the same cabin, holding the pine model. Behind them, faint but visible, a figure stood in the trees. Mason slammed the door as he came in. "We found him!" Caleb looked up. "Found who?" "The man in the picture. Name's Roy Tenner. Used to work the mines before they shut down in 2012. Guess where he lived?" Caleb's stomach sank. "The Ridge. Disappeared a month before the twins did." Mason dropped a folder on the desk. Local whispers said he'd gone off-grid, claimed the mountain was whispering back. Caleb studied the old photo again. The man's outline was blurred, but his posture, protective, almost paternal, didn't match a threat. "You think he helped them survive? Or helped them vanish?" Mason said. "Either way, someone wanted us to forget." Outside, thunder rolled through the valley, even though the sky was clear. That night, Caleb returned to the cabin alone. Snowlight glowed through the cracks, illuminating the small table. He began searching the place inch by inch until his flashlight caught on a loose floorboard. Beneath it lay a small, leather-bound journal, its pages warped with time. The first entry read, "Day 3. We found the man. He says we don't have to go back yet." Each page painted fragments of their life, hunting lessons, drawings of wolves, and coded maps of the mountain trails. Then, the final entry. The man said, "The world isn't ready for what the mountain keeps, but one day, someone will be. If that's you, don't let them take it again." The last line was signed only with a single letter, O. Caleb closed the book slowly, heart pounding. When he looked up, faint light shimmered outside the window. Two beams flickering side by side, like lanterns moving through the trees. Mason joined him the next morning. The journal sat between them, silent proof that something far deeper had happened. "State's sending a team," Mason said. "They'll comb everything, every inch of that ridge." Caleb shook his head. "They'll scare it away." "What, ghosts?" Mason laughed nervously. "No," Caleb said softly. "The truth." They watched as the snow melted under the new sun, revealing two clear footprints just outside the cabin door. Small, barefoot, fresh. Mason bent down. "That's impossible." Caleb said nothing. He simply looked toward the ridge, where the faint glow of the cabin light still pulsed through the mist. He whispered, "Maybe they were never lost. Maybe they just went home." News of the rediscovered cabin spread through the nearby towns like wildfire. Reporters drove up the narrow dirt roads, asking questions that no one wanted to answer. Mason stood on the cabin porch, watching their cameras flash through the trees. "They'll pick it clean," he muttered. Caleb didn't respond. He was crouched near the old bridge again, turning over a small object he'd found lodged in the mud. A pendant, shaped like a wolf's head, crudely carved from stone. He pocketed it before anyone saw. Something about it felt familiar, as if it belonged to the same set as the missing bracelet. When he returned to the cabin, he noticed something else. The pine model on the table had moved. It now faced the opposite direction, pointing north toward the deepest part of the forest. "Looks like someone's still leaving breadcrumbs," he murmured. That night, he packed his flashlight and followed the direction the model pointed. The trail led him to a collapsed mine entrance, overgrown with vines and roots. Half buried near the opening lay an old lantern, rusted but recently disturbed. Inside, a folded map, hand-drawn, marked with symbols matching the ones in Lily's drawings. He held the map up to the light. There were two initials in the corner, L and O. Beside them, one more note. "We heard them." "Below!" Caleb hesitated, listening. Beneath the mountain's quiet hum came a faint metallic echo, like tools against stone. He stepped closer, then stopped. The sound wasn't coming from inside the mine. It was behind him, a voice, soft but certain. "You shouldn't be here." He spun around. No one, only the empty woods and a gust of wind that smelled faintly of smoke and pine sap. The next morning, Mason met Caleb at the station. "You look like you didn't sleep." "I didn't," Caleb said. "There's something under the ridge." Mason frowned. "You sound like Roy Tenner." Caleb hesitated, then placed the journal on the desk and opened to a page near the end. Folded inside was something he hadn't noticed before, a small cassette tape marked only with the word, "Listen." They found an old player in the evidence locker and pressed play. Static, then faint breathing. A young voice, Owen's, whispered, "If you find this, we're not gone. The mountain keeps us safe. Don't tell them where we are." Mason stared at the recorder, pale. That's his voice." The tape cut to silence, then a second voice, Lily's, barely audible. "Tell Caleb we forgive him." Caleb's throat tightened. "That's not possible." But the emotion in the voice was real, not a trick, not a recording spliced later. It was them. Determined to find answers, Caleb tracked down the last person rumored to have seen Roy Tenner alive, a reclusive hunter named Darby, living off-grid in a cabin on the western slope. Darby opened the door with suspicion. "You're the ranger poking around in ghosts, ain't you?" "I'm just trying to understand what happened," Caleb said. Darby chuckled darkly. "You can't understand the mountain. You just listen." He handed Caleb an old Polaroid, Roy standing beside the twins, smiling faintly, a wolf pup at their feet. "They were alive for years," Darby said. "Roy built them that cabin, raised them like his own. Then the storms came, and the mountain closed its gates." Caleb's pulse quickened. "The storms killed them?" Darby shook his head. "No, The mountain kept them. Before Caleb could ask what that meant, the old man shut the door, leaving him with more questions than answers. That evening, Caleb sat alone by the fire in his own cabin, the cassette player beside him. He replayed the tape, focusing on the background sounds: wind, footsteps, faint laughter. But in the final seconds, just before the tape ended, a new sound emerged: 3 slow knocks. He looked up. Someone, or something, was knocking on his own door. He opened it to the cold night air. No one was there. Only a small shape rested on the porch, a pine cone, wrapped in a strip of fabric embroidered with 2 stitched letters: L-O. He stood frozen, heart pounding, the forest whispering all around him. For the first time he felt it, not fear, but understanding. The twins hadn't disappeared into the mountain. They had become part of it. In the morning, the ridge was crawling with search teams. Helicopters circled overhead, reporters lined the fences, and every sound of the forest was swallowed by the hum of engines. Mason met Caleb on the trail. "They found something," he said quietly, "inside the mine." Caleb's pulse raced. "What is it?" "Not bodies," Mason said. "Drawings, dozens of them, all of the same thing." He handed Caleb a photo. On the stone walls, drawn in charcoal, were 2 figures, small and barefoot, standing beneath a sun carved from spirals. "They called it the Gate of Light," Mason continued. "Geologists say that mine collapsed decades before the twins were born. So how did their drawings end up there?" Caleb stared at the photo, his heart caught between awe and grief. "They weren't trying to escape," he whispered. "They were marking their home." That evening, Caleb stayed in the cabin one last time. He placed the cassette, the photo, and the journal on the table. No, the state investigators would confiscate them by morning. As he stared into the fire, a voice broke the silence. "You came back." He turned. Lily stood by the door, older now, her hair longer, her face calm, but unmistakably her. Owen was beside her, quiet and steady. Caleb blinked. "You're here," she finished gently. "Not gone. The mountain let us stay." Tears filled his eyes. "Everyone's been searching for you." Lily smiled faintly. "Then tell them you found what they were meant to lose." When he looked away to wipe his eyes and looked back, they were gone. Only 2 footprints remained near the door, fading slowly in the firelight. Morning came gray and heavy. When the investigators arrived, the cabin was empty. No journal, no tape, no footprints. Only the pine model sat on the table, untouched. Mason pulled Caleb aside. "Where's the evidence?" Caleb shook his head. "There never was any." Mason searched his face. "You're lying." "Maybe," Caleb said quietly. "Or maybe the mountain just keeps what belongs to it." He looked toward the ridge. The mist had lifted, revealing sunlight breaking through the trees, and for a moment it looked like the forest was breathing. The headlines faded in a week. The cameras left. The forest returned to silence. But every few nights, locals swore they saw a faint light glowing in the distance, steady, unwavering, just like before. Caleb transferred to a new district soon after. Before leaving, he visited Mrs. Keene's old house. It had been abandoned for years, but a single envelope sat on the porch, sealed with pine sap. Inside was a photo, the twins by the river, smiling. On the back, in careful handwriting, were 3 words: "Thank you, Caleb." He stood there for a long time, the mountain wind brushing through his hair, carrying the scent of pine and rain. Years later, hikers still tell stories of the ridge. Some say they've heard children laughing through the trees. Others claim they've found tiny pine models near old trails, each pointing toward the same clearing. And at night, if you stand quietly enough, you can still see the faint glow of a cabin light between the trees. Not haunting, just watching. Because some stories never end. They simply live on where silence is deepest and where love refuses to be forgotten. And every time the wind passes through the forest, it carries two familiar voices whispering the same thing. We're home.